This video is sponsored by SetApp. Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and while I already did a video on the highest end iMac yesterday, a lot of you requested that I take a look at the base model as well. Well, I did just that, because in today's video we are going to look at the cheapest M1 iMac available and see what the differences really are. And spoiler alert, it's more than just the ports. So here we have two seemingly similar iMacs. The green one on the left is the base model, which starts at $1,299, while the blue one on the right is one of the higher end models, which starts at $1,499. And let's get some things out of the way first. So the base model iMac comes with a different M1 chip that has 7 GPU cores, while the more expensive model comes with 8 GPU cores. We'll talk more about the differences between those chips later in the video, but both models can be upgraded to 16 gigabytes of memory for an additional $200. But the base model can only be upgraded to 1 terabyte of storage, while the higher end versions can be upgraded all the way up to 2 terabytes. The base model is also more limited in the color choices, so it can only come in silver, blue, green, and pink, while the higher end model gets an additional orange, purple, or yellow color. The base model also has some external and internal differences. The most notable and most immediate thing people will notice is the particularly anemic port selection on the back, because the base model only comes with just 2 Thunderbolt ports, while the other model comes with 2 Thunderbolt ports and 2 USB-C ports, giving you 4 in total. Not only does the base model come with less external ports, but a closer inspection of the power brick will reveal the lack of an Ethernet port. Now for me, I'm a little mixed on this. Personally, I feel much more comfortable with 4 ports, but when you realize the higher end iMac only has 2 more USB-C ports on the back, I could easily see that most people would just be better off buying an external dock or an adapter, like this one I have from Anker, and you'll get more USB-C ports, USB-A ports, an SD card slot, micro SD card slot, HDMI port, and hey, who cares if the power brick has an Ethernet port, because a good external dock will have an Ethernet port built into it too, just like the dock that I have. So ports might actually not be that big of a deal. The bigger upset for me is taking a look at the differences of the Magic Keyboard, because you'll notice that instead of the Touch ID fingerprint sensor on the top right, the base model is replaced with a lock button. It's just a standard button. There's no fingerprint reader there. And Touch ID on the Mac is such a nice feature, and it's great to be able to just autofill passwords and get into password protected apps just by resting my finger on the keyboard. Now, while buying the mid-tier model gives you these accessories as standard, not all hope is lost on the base models. If you really want these accessories on the base level iMac, and you want to save as much money as possible, you can still select these on Apple's website when you're configuring the iMac. So the Ethernet power brick will be an additional $30, while the Magic Keyboard with Touch ID will be a $50 upgrade. If you combine both of these optional upgrades together, you get a total price of $1,379. And hey, $120, that's actually some pretty good cost saving. And when you actually compare the difference between both models, then all of a sudden, the only difference is an extra GPU core and 2 additional external ports, right? Well, no. You see, there's also another change that Apple isn't exactly forthright with. And that is that the base model iMac is also built differently internally and only has 1 fan to cool the system, while the higher end version actually has 2 fans. Well, the M1 already runs well on devices with no fan like the MacBook Air, and it runs even better with devices that have just 1 fan like the MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini. So is an extra fan really going to make that much of a difference? Oh, that's right, I'm making the video. I have to answer the question for you. Off to the benchmarks! First, I loaded up a simple Geekbench benchmark, and the results weren't anything drastic. Sure, the base model iMac scored a bit lower with a single core score of 1731 and a multi-core score of 7541, but the other iMac was only slightly ahead with a single core score of 1747 and a multi-core score of 7664. So we're not going to learn much from Geekbench, it seems, so let's load up Cinebench R23, which just hammers the CPU. Now, as we run this benchmark, we can start to see a different story between both iMacs, and the base model is noticeably slower at completing this benchmark. When all is said and done, the iMac with 2 fans finishes faster and receives a higher score of 17,718, while the base model iMac finishes later and gets a score of 6,916. Now, what do these numbers tell us? First of all, Cinebench is a CPU benchmark, and while the higher-end iMac is advertised with the advantage of having 1 more GPU core, this should not impact the results of this benchmark because the CPUs should be exactly the same. So that is clearly telling us that the extra fan inside of the blue iMac is actually cooling the M1 chip more efficiently than the base model with its 1 fan. And with this better thermal design on the higher end, we're able to see that the CPU is able to run at higher clock speed frequencies for longer sustained periods of time. So that's interesting, but I also want to test the GPU cores because I really want to know more about what we're losing in graphics capabilities. But before we do that, I want to tell you about how you can run so many great apps on your Mac with our sponsor for this video, Setapp. To really take advantage of the M1 processor in any of these Macs, you need great software, but even a single app purchase on the Mac can be costly. So if you don't have an arsenal of apps, you're not taking full advantage of your Mac. Setapp solves this problem by curating a large set of paid flagship apps that brings all of these apps under one roof for just $10 a month. If you were to purchase all of these apps on Setapp by yourself, you'd end up paying $6,000. That's the same cost as a Mac Pro. And there's absolutely no need for you to know in advance which app you should install to solve your problem because you can simply navigate through the categories, and each category has a bunch of apps to solve the most common problems within each use case. And there are a lot of great diverse apps bundled in here. Some of my favorites are apps like Clean My Mac X, which helps you manage your Mac storage by getting rid of unnecessary system junk, to one of my favorite photo editors, Luminar. I use this photo editor to make thumbnails on my channel, and with Luminar you get advanced AI to make editing photos as simple as clicking a button and generating instant stunning results. And even advanced photo techniques like sky replacement can all be done using Luminar's AI editor. All of these apps are available on Setapp, and that's only scratching the surface of what you can download. And don't take my word for it, because you can try Setapp for free by using the link in the description, so you can try all of these apps today. And thank you so much to Setapp for sponsoring this video. Okay, so next I wanted to take a look at a graphics benchmark, because this is an advertised disadvantage of the base model, which has 7 GPU cores instead of the 8 GPU cores found on the other models. And this is where I was expecting the biggest difference when benchmarking, so I loaded up my standard Heavens benchmark and set the resolution to 1080p for both machines. And honestly, the results here were not that drastic. Again, the blue iMac does score higher with an overall average of 54.5 frames per second, but the base model iMac isn't that far behind, with only a 2.8 difference in the average frames per second. So it seems that while I was expecting a big difference in GPU performance, in reality the CPU tests seem to be a bigger difference. And that's not something that is clearly advertised in Apple's literature. But okay, before I get ahead of myself, benchmarks are just benchmarks. We know that. So let's do a real-world test with what I do every day, exporting video. Now, for this test, I'm just doing a very simple 10-minute 4K video export in Final Cut Pro with just one stream of 4K video with a color grading 30% saturation boost applied to the clip, with pre-rendering turned off in Final Cut Pro, and I'm exporting both video clips to Apple ProRes. And while we could maybe glean some information from the benchmarks, This Final Cut export puts things into perspective as we start to see the higher end iMac pull ahead of the base level model, and it's clearly exporting video faster than the base level model. The higher end model finished the 10-minute 4K export in 3 minutes and 23 seconds, while the base iMac is still exporting the video. The base model iMac doesn't take that much longer to finish and finishes the export at 4 minutes and 2 seconds. So there you have it. A combination of CPU and GPU working together with the better cooling system, and the $1,499 version of the iMac actually does beat the base model in higher-end multi-threaded workloads. Now, is waiting 39 seconds in export times a huge deal for most people? No. And I'm sure most of the people using this iMac are never going to notice the difference in sustained clock speed performance anyway, unless you're doing intensive tasks like video editing. Most people buying this iMac are going to be doing simpler workloads like web browsing, email, video calls, watching video, listening to music, light photo and video editing, and so on. And if you're wondering if the base level M1 iMac can do more than basic tasks, well, yeah, it can do that too, because I edited this entire video on the M1 iMac. Well, I mean, you're seeing this video, I'm technically recording it right now, so actually, I don't really know right now. Greg, can we get an update on the video editing process? Like, can you use the built-in iMac webcam and microphone? And tell us about it, because the viewers aren't going to mind your messy bedhead and your tired eyes. They just really want to know if you could edit a video on the base level iMac and was the experience smooth with just 8 gigabytes of RAM.
It's a good thing we have espresso, because I have been up all night. I got around 3 hours of sleep with a short nap, but I've been working on this video. I've been video editing this video that is out right now. And overall, the video editing experience on this iMac was relatively smooth. Now, I did run into some issues when I was starting to get towards the end of my edit, and that was a bottleneck of the 8 gigabytes of memory. It had nothing to do with the CPU. So the base model CPU on this is going to be fine for video editing, but if you are going to be getting this machine for video editing and your projects are longer than 10 minutes or you're using multiple streams of 4K video, I would highly, highly, highly recommend upgrading to the 16 gigabyte model. I think that is definitely worth it. Another thing I wanted to mention, so in the beginning of this video, I talked about how the iMac, the base level, had one fan in it. Well, we've actually learned a bit more about this base level iMac, and it actually is an even bigger internal difference than just one fan added. Because not only does the base level iMac just have one fan, but it also just has a heatsink and no heat pipe connecting to it, while the higher end iMac has 2 fans and a heat pipe. So not only is there a difference in the number of fans cooling, but also the internal cooling system is just an entirely different design. So that's probably why we're seeing less performance on this base level iMac. But I'm gonna take my disheveled self away and hand it back to the well-groomed Greg.
Good job, bedhead Greg. I think I speak for everyone watching this video when we say you did a great job and we're all really proud of you. Now, is the base level iMac worth it at $1,300? Yes, I think it is, because it still represents a really good value of a fast and efficient M1 chip, amazing looking 4.5K display, great speakers, a good webcam, and the same design as the other models. But it is important to note that you shouldn't be fooled when picking between these two products that share the same exact name, just iMac, because there are distinct differences that you need to balance and weigh out to find out which one is worth it to you. Some of you won't care or won't personally benefit from that little performance boost on the higher end models. And you'll probably never connect an Ethernet cable to your iMac, or you don't care about Touch ID, or you were planning on using a different third-party keyboard anyway, and while 2 ports might be limiting, maybe you never connect anything to your Mac, or you're thinking about just buying an external dock or adapter so you can have even more ports than anything that Apple offers. Well, if that sounds like you, then yes, this base model iMac is worth it. And even if you have a bigger budget of $1,500, you might actually be better off spending that extra money on storage or maybe the additional 8 gigabytes of memory if you're video editing. However, the same goes for the higher end iMac. It's not a ripoff. It packs in a lot of improvements from the port selection to Touch ID being standard on the Magic Keyboard, and actually a better thermal design that results not only in better GPU performance, but better CPU performance as well. So it's actually probably the most powerful M1 Mac available right now. Listen, to make a long story short, you need to take the information, weigh the pros and cons of both versions of the iMac, and try to find which one fits you the best. And I don't think there is a wrong choice with either of these models, just a better choice that personally fits you. Alright everyone, I really hope this video was helpful in helping you pick out which M1 iMac is right for you, because honestly, working on this video was a little eye-opening to me on how many differences there actually were between the base model and the mid-tier model. If this video was helpful, be sure to leave me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, well, make sure you're subscribed. If you decided which iMac you want to buy, well, you can also use one of my affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.